Homeless man finds baby abandoned behind dumpster. What he does next shocks the entire city. Asterisk, the rain hammered down on the cracked asphalt behind Murphy's Diner, turning the narrow alley into a river of filth and forgotten dreams. Thomas Mitchell pulled his torn jacket tighter around his shoulders, his weathered hands trembling not just from the cold, but from the hunger that had been his constant companion for the past 3 months. At 62 years old, he had never imagined his life would come to this, searching through dumpsters for scraps of food, sleeping under cardboard boxes, invisible to a world that had once known him as a respected construction foreman. Economic downturn had hit his company hard. Layoffs came swift and merciless, and Thomas, despite his decades of experience, found himself among the casualties. His savings evaporated, paying for his wife's cancer treatments, and when she passed away 6 months ago, the medical bills consumed everything they had built together. The house went to the bank, his truck was repossessed, and Thomas found himself on the streets with nothing but the clothes on his back and a heart full of grief. But on this particular Tuesday evening in November, as Thomas approached the dumpster behind Murphy's Diner, hoping to find some leftover bread or maybe a half sandwich, he heard something that made his blood freeze. It wasn't the usual sounds of the alley, no scurrying rats or dripping water. It was something else entirely, something that shouldn't be there, a soft muffled crying that seemed almost human. Thomas stopped dead in his tracks, his heart pounding against his ribs. The sound came again, weaker this time, barely audible above the drumming rain. He moved closer to the dumpster, his worn sneakers splashing through puddles, and that's when he saw it. Tucked behind the large metal container, partially hidden by a pile of soggy cardboard boxes, was a small bundle wrapped in what looked like a dirty pink blanket. The crying was coming from inside that bundle. Thomas's hands shook as he knelt down in the filthy water, his knees immediately soaking through his threadbare jeans. With trembling fingers, he carefully pulled back a corner of the blanket, and what he saw nearly stopped his heart completely. Staring back at him was the tiniest face he had ever seen, a newborn baby, no more than a few days old, with bright blue eyes and skin so pale it was almost translucent. The infant was barely breathing, lips tinged blue from the cold, and Thomas realized with growing horror that this child had been left here to die. Asterisk, without hesitation, Thomas scooped the baby into his arms, cradling the fragile bundle against his chest. The infant was so small, so impossibly light, that Thomas feared he might accidentally hurt her just by holding her too tightly. But as he felt the weak flutter of her heartbeat against his palm, something awakened inside him that he hadn't felt since his wife's death. Purpose. "Hey there, little one," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "You're going to be okay. I've got you now." Thomas looked around frantically, his mind racing. He needed to get this baby somewhere warm and safe. But where could a homeless man take a newborn infant? The nearest hospital was 15 blocks away, and he had no money for a taxi or bus fare. The rain was getting heavier, and the baby's breathing seemed to be getting more labored by the minute. That's when Thomas remembered something. 3 blocks north, there was a 24-hour convenience store where the night clerk, Maria, had always been kind to him. She had occasionally given him a cup of hot coffee on particularly cold nights, never asking for payment, just offering a moment of human compassion. If anyone would help him now, it would be her. Thomas tucked the baby securely inside his jacket, using his own body heat to warm the tiny child, and began the treacherous journey through the storm-soaked streets. Every step was agony, not physical pain, but the emotional weight of knowing that this innocent life depended entirely on him. Cars rushed past, their headlights cutting through the darkness, their occupants warm and dry, and completely unaware of the drama unfolding on the sidewalk. As he walked, Thomas found himself talking to the baby, his voice a steady stream of reassurance and promises. "We're going to find you help, sweetheart, someone who can take proper care of you, someone who can give you the life you deserve." But even as he spoke these words, Thomas felt something stirring in his chest, a protective instinct he hadn't experienced since he and his wife had tried unsuccessfully to have children of their own 30 years ago. The convenience store's neon sign appeared through the rain like a beacon of hope. Thomas pushed through the glass door, water streaming from his clothes, and Maria looked up from behind the counter with surprise and concern. "Thomas, what are you doing out in this weather? You're soaked to the bone." That's when Thomas opened his jacket, revealing the tiny bundle he had been protecting. Maria's eyes widened in shock, her hand flying to her mouth as she saw the baby's pale, still-faced, Dios mío, Maria Gasped, rushing around the counter. "Where did you find her?" "Behind Murphy's Diner," Thomas said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Someone left her there to die. Maria, she's so cold, and I don't know what to do." Maria, a mother of 3 herself, immediately took charge. She grabbed a clean towel from behind the counter and gently took the baby from Thomas's arms, her experienced hands checking for signs of life. The infant's breathing was shallow but steady, and Maria's relief was palpable. "She's alive." "But barely," Maria said, already reaching for her phone. "We need to call 911 right now." As Maria dialed emergency services, Thomas stood dripping in the fluorescent light of the store, watching this woman he barely knew spring into action to save a child that wasn't hers. The contrast wasn't lost on him. Here was someone with so little, working a minimum wage job in the middle of the night, yet she didn't hesitate for a second to help. The paramedics arrived within minutes, their sirens cutting through the night like a lifeline. They worked quickly and efficiently, checking the baby's vital signs, wrapping her in warming blankets, and preparing her for transport to the hospital. Thomas watched from the sidelines, feeling suddenly useless and forgotten. "Sir," one of the paramedics called to him. "Are you the one who found her?" Thomas nodded, unsure of what to say. "You saved her life," the paramedic continued. "Another hour in those conditions, and we would have been too late. She's hypothermic and dehydrated, but she's going to make it because of what you did." As the ambulance pulled away, its red lights disappearing into the night, Thomas felt an overwhelming emptiness. For those brief moments, holding that baby, protecting her, he had felt like he mattered again, like his life had meaning beyond just surviving from one day to the next. Maria placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You did a good thing tonight, Thomas. A very good thing." But Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that he should have done more. As he walked back into the storm, heading toward whatever shelter he could find for the night, his mind was consumed with thoughts of the baby. What would happen to her now? Would she go into the foster care system? Would she ever know that a homeless man had been the one to save her life? The next morning, Thomas found himself outside St. Mary's Hospital, drawn there by a force he couldn't explain. He had spent the night under an overpass, but sleep had been impossible. All he could think about was those tiny blue eyes and the way the baby had felt in his arms, so fragile, so dependent, so trusting. Thomas had never felt more out of place than he did walking through the pristine halls of St. Mary's Hospital. His clothes were still damp from the previous night's rain, his appearance disheveled and rough around the edges. Nurses and visitors gave him suspicious looks as he made his way to the information desk, and he could feel their judgment like a physical weight on his shoulders. "Excuse me," he said quietly to the receptionist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. "I'm looking for information about a baby that was brought in last night. She was found abandoned, and I was the one who found her." The receptionist's expression softened immediately. "Oh my goodness, you're the man who saved that little girl. Let me get someone from pediatrics to speak with you." Within minutes, Dr. Sarah Chen, the head of the pediatric unit, appeared in the lobby. She was a small woman with graying hair and the tired eyes of someone who had seen too much suffering. But when she looked at Thomas, her face lit up with genuine gratitude. "Mr. Mitchell, isn't it? I can't tell you how grateful we are for what you did last night. That baby, we're calling her Hope for now. She wouldn't have survived much longer in those conditions." "How is she?" Thomas asked, his voice thick with emotion. "She's stable, malnourished and suffering from exposure, but she's a fighter. We estimate she's about 3 days old, which means she was abandoned almost immediately after birth. Someone left her there with the intention that she wouldn't be found." Dr. Chen paused, studying Thomas's face carefully. "Would you like to see her?" Thomas's heart leaped, but then reality crashed down on him. "I don't think that's appropriate. I mean, look at me. I'm homeless. I have nothing to offer her. I just wanted to make sure she was okay." "Mr. Mitchell," Dr. Chen said gently, "that little girl is alive because of your compassion and quick thinking. You have every right to see her, and frankly, I think it might do you both some good." The neonatal intensive care unit was a world of beeping machines and soft lighting, where the most vulnerable members of society fought their earliest battles for survival. Thomas followed Dr. Chen to a small incubator in the corner, and there she was, the baby he had rescued, now clean and warm, with color returned to her cheeks. "She's beautiful," Thomas whispered, his eyes filling with tears. "She is," Dr. Chen agreed, "and she's going to need a lot of love and care as she grows up. The social workers are already working on finding her a placement, but it's not easy. Good foster families are hard to come by, especially for newborns who might have ongoing medical needs." As Thomas stood there watching the baby sleep, something shifted inside him. For months, he had felt like his life was over, like he was just waiting to die. But looking at this tiny child, this innocent life that he had saved, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. "Hope, what if, double quotes Thomas began, then stopped himself. The idea forming in his mind was crazy, impossible. "What if what?" Dr. Chen prompted gently. "What if I wanted to take care of her? I know it sounds insane. I'm homeless. I have no money, no job, but I saved her life, and maybe she saved mine too." Dr. Chen's expression was carefully neutral, but Thomas could see the concern in her eyes. "Mr. Mitchell, I appreciate what you're feeling. I really do. But caring for a newborn requires resources, a stable home, steady income, health care, coverage. The state has very strict requirements for foster care and adoption." "I know," Thomas said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know it's impossible. I just, I can't stop thinking about her, about what kind of life she'll have." What Thomas didn't know was that his story had already begun to spread. Maria, the convenience store clerk, had called her sister, who worked at the local newspaper. The story of a homeless man rescuing an abandoned baby had touched something deep in the community's heart. And by the next morning, Thomas Mitchell was front-page news. The headline read, "Homeless Hero Saves Abandoned Newborn." And the article detailed Thomas's selfless act, his own tragic circumstances, and his obvious love for the child he had rescued. The story spread like wildfire through social media, and within hours, St. Mary's Hospital was flooded with phone calls from people wanting to help. Thomas was completely unaware of this media attention. When he returned to the hospital the next day, he had spent another sleepless night thinking about baby Hope, wondering if there was any way he could be part of her life. As he approached the information desk, he was surprised to see a crowd of people in the lobby, including several news cameras. "There he is," someone shouted, and suddenly Thomas found himself surrounded by reporters. Microphones thrust in his face, cameras flashing. He was completely overwhelmed, backing away from the crowd in confusion and fear. "Mr. Mitchell, how does it feel to be a hero? What made you risk your own safety to save that baby? Are you planning to seek custody of the child?" Dr. Chen appeared through the crowd, taking Thomas by the arm and leading him away from the chaos. "I'm sorry about this," she said, as they escaped into an elevator. "The story broke this morning, and it's been crazy ever since." "What story?" Thomas asked, genuinely confused. Dr. Chen showed him the newspaper article on her phone, and Thomas read in amazement as his life was laid bare for the world to see. But more than that, he read about the outpouring of support that had followed. Donations were pouring in, money, baby supplies, offers of housing and employment. The community had rallied around both Thomas and baby Hope in a way that neither of them could have imagined. "There's more," Dr. Chen said, her voice filled with excitement. "A local construction company saw the article. They remember you from your previous work, and they want to offer you a job, a real job, with benefits and steady pay. And there's a family, the Hendersons, they've been trying to adopt for years. But they want to meet you first. They think you should be part of Hope's life, whatever that looks like." Thomas felt his knees go weak. After months of feeling invisible, forgotten by the world, suddenly everyone wanted to help. But more importantly, they wanted to help him help Hope. *. 6 months later, Thomas Mitchell stood in the backyard of a modest 2-story house in the suburbs, watching as 18-month-old Hope took her first tentative steps across the grass. Her adoptive parents, Jim and Susan Henderson, cheered from the porch, while Thomas knelt with his arms outstretched, encouraging the toddler to walk toward him. "Come on, sweetheart," he called softly. "You can do it." Hope giggled and took 3 wobbly steps before falling into Thomas's waiting arms. He scooped her up, spinning her around as she squealed with delight. And for a moment, the world felt perfect. The transformation in Thomas's life had been nothing short of miraculous. The construction job had given him not just income, but dignity and purpose. The community donations had helped him secure a small apartment just 10 minutes away from the Henderson family. But most importantly, the Hendersons had welcomed him into their lives as Hope's honorary grandfather. Recognizing that the bond between Thomas and the little girl was something special and irreplaceable. "She's getting so big," Susan Henderson said, joining them in the yard, "and she definitely has your stubborn streak, Thomas." Thomas laughed, settling Hope on his hip. "That's not stubbornness, that's determination. This little girl is going to change the world someday." As if she understood, Hope reached up and patted Thomas's cheek with her tiny hand, babbling something that sounded almost like Papa Tom, which had become her name for him. The story of Thomas and Hope had continued to inspire people long after the initial media attention died down. Thomas had started speaking at community events, sharing his story and advocating for both homeless individuals and children in foster care. He had learned that there were thousands of people like him, good people who had fallen through the cracks of society, and thousands of children like Hope who needed someone to care. "You know," Jim Henderson said, joining his wife and Thomas in the yard, "Hope's going to grow up knowing that she was saved by an angel. That when the world seemed darkest, someone cared enough to risk everything for her." Thomas shook his head. "I didn't save her," he said quietly. "She saved me. Before I found Hope, I was just surviving. Now I'm living." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Thomas reflected on how dramatically his life had changed. He thought about that rainy night behind Murphy's Diner, about the moment he heard that tiny cry, and made the decision to act. He had no way of knowing then that saving one small life would end up saving his own. Hope had fallen asleep in his arms, her small body warm and trusting against his chest. Thomas looked down at her peaceful face and made a silent promise. The same promise he had made that first night in the rain. He would always be there for her, always protect her, always make sure she knew she was loved. The story of Thomas Mitchell and baby Hope proves that heroism isn't about having superpowers or wealth or status. Sometimes, being a hero is as simple as choosing compassion over indifference, action over apathy, love over fear. In a world that can often feel cold and uncaring, their story reminds us that one person's kindness can change everything. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that every act of kindness matters, please subscribe to our channel. We share stories of hope, courage, and the incredible power of human compassion every week. Hit that subscribe button and join our community of people who believe that everyone deserves a second chance, and that sometimes, the most unlikely heroes are the ones who change the world.